Leah from Island Sun Tarot. This is part 3 in my mini-series, X Decks, where I'm talking about decks that I've culled from my collection about a year ago when I made a big move to Hawaii and I went through everything. So let's get started. As with my other videos, we're talking about 5 decks that I culled from my collection and then the decks that I chose to keep as a I use this more, or something sort of comparative. Here we go. So first, the Vivid Journey Tarot by Jessica Allaire, and it was published by Llewellyn. I feel like you don't ever see this deck anymore, but it was absolutely gorgeous. I loved it so much, and the artwork had a very vivid journey, vibrant colors, and it was so fun. And this one, I'm choosing to mention it first, is because this is the only one out of these videos, these decks that I'm mentioning, that I didn't actually cull from my collection. I gave it to a friend at work. It just, I don't know, she wanted to get into tarot. She knew that I read tarot and she would always talk to me about it. And she was just under the impression that she needed to be gifted a deck and she was afraid to go buy one. And I was like, no, don't even worry about it. Just go buy one that speaks to you. And then after we had had that conversation, I started thinking about it and he was like, you know what? That Vivid Journey Tarot just screams her in my mind. And I just think it would be perfect for her. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to gift it to her. I gifted it to her. She absolutely loved it. Probably one of the best things I ever did. And I'm so glad that I did. So I just had to get that one out of the way first. But the Vivid Journey Tarot, gorgeous deck, just completely RWS, reworked, the artwork, lovely. Colors, beautiful. Have I felt the need to repurchase it for my collection? No, not at all. I'm grouping this deck with 2 others because there is a deck that when I gifted it, I was like, oh, it's fine. I have this. I don't need. Okay, so first one. Second one. I guess second and third one. These ones kind of go together. These 2 decks are by Herzer. So the original is like the illuminated RWS and then the rainbow RWS. So all these decks, it's Pixie's artwork, but it's all just been recolored by Herzer, and all these decks are handmade by her. So you can pick the backing on them, and they come in gorgeous handmade bags. However, the cardstock, or the cards are very thin, and it almost feels like it's been laminated and trimmed at home, which is so sweet. And it has a very like if someone knits you a blanket or if someone makes you a quilt, it just really has that thoughtful, caring feel to these decks. And again, they're stunning, beautiful coloration. And for these 2 that I had, the illuminated one, I got the bigger version, so I believe it was more so the size of almost like the Druidcraft, quite big. And then the rainbow one that I had was more of a pocket size, so smaller, like the Hanson Roberts. And I loved them, but I never used them because the cardstock was just too, it was just too light and flimsy for me. You couldn't even shuffle them. Overhand shuffling them, maybe a little bit. For me, that worked a little bit better, but I couldn't shuffle it. And it just didn't work for me. So that was purely a tactile thing. I loved the coloration. It was so beautiful. It really gave me a new appreciation for the RWS because I hadn't actually picked up a deck that was like the Radiant Rider-Waite-Smith or the Centennial with Pixie's artwork, or maybe like a recoloration. This was the first, these 2 decks were the first ones that I picked up that were just that original artwork, just recolored. And I loved them, the artwork, but I just couldn't get on with the thinner cardstock and the lamination. And I honestly thought that I'd be fine because I love the card so much, and I had watched many walkthroughs of the different versions that she has, because I will link it below because the website has all her different versions and they're all beautiful. If you love Pixie's artwork or the line work, it's just all been recolored and it's gorgeous. So I'll link it below so you guys can take a look. But for those 3 decks, the Vivid Journey Tarot, Rainbow RWS, and the Illuminated RWS, all of those, it was easy for me to, gift the one to a friend and then cull the other 2 because of the Crystal Visions Tarot. And I know this maybe to some may not compare for that same like RWS niche, maybe because of the artwork. But for me, this is as good as an RWS clone as it gets for my style of reading and my style artwork. It's just very fantasy. You're in this other fantasy world with fairies and dragons. Again, with the colors, just as with the other three, the colors are really beautiful on this. So this is by Jennifer Glasso and is published by US Games. And I think my only thing with this deck that bothers me is the darn copyright down in the corner. I don't know if it'll focus. It's on every single card down there. And the cardstock's a little glossy. You can kind of see the camera there. And but for me, it's easy to shuffle. I actually don't mind it at all. Except now that US Games is coming out with all this beautiful new cardstock, like on the Spirit Song Tarot, Tarot of the Abyss. Oh, I would love this reprinted on that cardstock. I just really think it would do this deck a major service if they took off the little white border, kept the colored titles down at the bottom, and printed it on new cardstock. It would just breathe amazing new life into this deck. And I feel like we don't hear about this deck as much. Like it's had its day. What was this? Maybe like 2010? Oh, I don't know. But what's it say on it? 2011. Okay, so I was close. But I don't know. I feel like this deck needs a revival just because I love it so much. Of course, I would never be offended if somebody said they didn't like this deck or, whatnot. Everybody has their own, cup of tea. I just really feel like maybe a lot of new readers would rediscover this deck if they reprinted it. So US Games, as if they would ever watch this, but if they did, please reprint it. I would totally buy another copy. So the Crystal Visions Tarot, I kept. I love it. I did feature it in I'm pretty sure it was like my spring tarot video because I was using it this spring, but really it's a year-round deck for me. It really is. There's no other way to put it. Okay, next we have now I culled this deck, the Aura Soma Tarot by Pamela Matthews. It's a self-published deck, and that goes with the little Aura Soma bottles. So I didn't have the bottle back version. I had just the logo back, so it's like navy blue and it has a little gold logo on the back. And that deck is deep. I think when I got it, I want to say there was 112 cards. So there's 2 versions of each of the major arcana and some archangel cards. Now I believe if you went and purchased it on their website, I believe they're up to 120 cards. So it's a chunky deck. And I had removed the archangel cards and was just trying to work with it just with their 2 versions of the majors and then the rest of the tarot. Sort of a colored pencil, real soft style artwork. Some of the faces could be a little quirky, but in a fun way. There are only a couple cards that distinctly come to mind immediately. This one that just really had a big, like, bright red and royal blue court gesture on it, mixed with like a clown face. Oh, there were only a couple of cards in the entire, out of, 112 cards or whatever it was when I had it, I really didn't go for, but that's okay. But that deck was just deep. And I love their 2 versions of the major arcana. That was really awesome. But when I got that deck, I had already had the Dreams of Gaia sitting on the shelf for quite some time. So for whatever reason, I stopped working with the Aura Soma to then pick up the Dreams of Gaia, which I'm so glad that I did because I have such a deep connection with this deck. But I never went back to the Aura Soma again. I don't know if it just felt like too much for me at the time because the Dreams of Gaia was so deep. and so heavy for me that it really just consumed me. And we had this deep, amazing love affair that lasted for quite some time. No, I didn't ever go back to the Orosoma Tarot, and so when it came to culling my collection, this is what I kept instead, that I sort of compared it to, just because in its own way, the Dreams of Gaia is its own system, and the Orosoma is very much its own system as well. So on that same token, I chose to keep this. The connection was definitely deeper. Same thing with this deck, just with the Orosoma. There's maybe 1 or 2 cards that I don't really appreciate the artwork on, but I can look past it for everything else. The Orosoma, I never got to this deck's level of connection, and I'm like personifying it too much, I'm sorry, but like I really feel like I got to know this deck and it got to know me really well, and I never got to that point with the Orosoma, and so it was really easy to cull for my collection. I definitely don't regret it. Maybe if I had had the bottle back version, because that seems like it's really hard to come by now. So from a collector standpoint, if I had the bottle back, maybe I would have regretted getting rid of it, but I think it would definitely still would have been, even a year later, one of those decks that just, ooh, I love this one, that would have just sat on the shelf. And in that type of situation where I wanted to pull a deck like this, it's a little bit more of a different system, I definitely would have always reached for this one. So there we have the Dreams of Gaia Tarot that I kept after culling the Orosoma Tarot by Pamela Matthews. So then the last one that I have here that I culled is the Wooden Tarot. It is by Andrew Schwartz, and the shop is on Etsy. It's called the Skull Garden Shop. So there was something like hauntingly beautiful and simple about the Wooden Tarot that I just absolutely loved, and I was so intrigued by it. And it was probably the most spacious or like sparse deck that I had ever bought at the time, and I really just wanted to work with it so bad. There was something about the artwork that really called to me, and I wouldn't necessarily say that I just fell head over heels for it, that I absolutely loved it, but it was challenging in a fun way, and I did enjoy using it, but it was very difficult for me to read with, and I feel like I definitely enjoyed the level of difficulty, and we had a great time together, but once the honeymoon phase was over, I never really reached for it anymore. And then there were, I don't want to say like a handful, but yeah, maybe like 5 cards or maybe a little more that ended up actually being just a little bit disturbing for me. And, but on the other hand, there were so many cards in that deck that I just absolutely loved so much. And for whatever reason, the way that they had the suits done with the crystals, I believe was for wands, and then they had skulls. And anyways, in my head, every single time I read with it, I kept on flip-flopping them, because in my head it made more sense for, you know, one of the elements that they had renamed the suit to be something else. I'm sorry, I don't quite remember exactly which one it was, but that was my other tiny issue that I couldn't quite get over. And so what I kept instead, I actually don't have anything else that's that simple in my collection at all. But at the time, this was really different for me, just like the Wooden Tarot was really different for me, and what I normally am drawn towards. And so I kept the Star Child Tarot. Bear with me, you're thinking to yourself, those aren't similar at all. But for me, there are some cards in here that I guess just are, really it's just more pip-ish. It's not that it necessarily just has the space with one single image. But in general, compared to some of my other decks, this is a little bit more sparse. Let me see if I can find, like here we have the Four of Wands. So at the time of owning the Wooden Tarot and then getting this, the Star Child Tarot, that for me was a new level of difficulty, having the decks sort of be this gorgeous, you know, gorgeous artwork, and then having some cards that are a little bit more sparse. There's a particular one, here we go. Got a couple here where we just sort of have this geometric. And so cards like that brought me to a new level of appreciation for decks like this that are a little bit more simple, but just the same with the Orasoma and the Dreams of Gaia. Was the same with the Wooden Tarot and the Star Child. I had a deeper connection with the Star Child, and I definitely was reaching for this more than the other. I love this card. Look at the cat. Oh. And with any deck, you know, not, I guess I can't say that because there's probably a couple that I could think of, but do we ever really love every single card? Maybe. No, most likely, at least for me. But this deck is pretty darn close for me. And so I think what I had already mentioned about there being a couple of, just a few cards that kind of were a little bit disturbing from the Wooden Tarot. So it made it kind of easier to cull that one. Here's another one that's a little more sparse. So yes, the Wooden Tarot I culled, and I kept the Star Child Tarot. So there you have it. That's part 3. I'm not sure if I might have a part 4. I might actually still have the decks to be able to show and talk about before selling them. It's been a couple months that I've had a handful put away, and I've only gone back and grabbed out, I think, one when I had gone through some things in preparing to make this little mini series, and then also just, it had been a year since I moved and gone through everything. So there might be one more of these, so we'll see. But if you haven't, check out my part 1 and part 2, and kind of full circle for this X Decks mini series. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.